tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort, so question as if you Warshak. Horsemen, forcemen, and they've long been having the course mapped. It ain't that you can't see, cause you can find it, Holmes, it's that you don't want to. You cope by putting the blinders on. I've been trying to find some kind of way, but I've kind of known that y'all would rather whine and latch to nonsense cause your mind is gone. I can't save every person, and politicking is bringing the worst out the very earth. And every perk of living on this turf is being chipped at and nerfed, but I can't sit back and lurk. I've got to get back, I'm certain it's my purpose. And it's a beautiful thing too. Hold up. Hey, looking at the technological advances. I used to be on dial-up looking for answers. Now what? Underappreciating was candid. And 20 years later, we got computers that hand fit. Used to be playing Sega Genesis with bros. Now I'm gaming with some folks on the other side of the globe. Used to go through a label if you trying to blow. Now people got more options on the table, got to post. Social media.
Oh, no, every time. All right, there we go. Hey, everyone. Greg Staley here of Diverge Media. Thank you for joining us for this very important discussion. Just a little background. I want to make clear that in no way does this panel support Russia, but we are going to be doing our best to lay out the history, to lay out perhaps the way Russia sees things that is not coming across in Western media, and to do the best job we can at laying out the history and perhaps the motivations of what is going on in Ukraine. So without further ado, we want to welcome our panel. We have Gilly. Gilly Davis is author of Wexit, the Reluctant Rebellion. And then we have Kuba. I'm going to let him pronounce his last name because we've discovered that it is much harder than previously thought. So Kuba is joining us from Poland in Warsaw. And if you just want to pronounce your last name for us so that we can have it on the record.
Yeah, hello. So my name is Kuba Przychodzeń, and as you told us, I am from Warsaw. That's it.
All right. So let's kind of go back. I guess we have the 2014 annexation of Crimea, but even a little bit further, I think maybe we should start with the abolition of the Soviet Union and the Soviet mindset, maybe around the value of individuals versus the collective. I think this is something that gets missed in Western media, and I'll leave it to you guys. I'm just going to post the question, and we'll kind of flow this way and let it go. But Western media doesn't really talk about this, but communist nation, the Soviet nation, was all about the collective. Forget the individual and the value they brought. If 10 people or 20 people had to die in the name of the collective, it was okay. And I think maybe part of that is still lingering in that population's mindset. And I'll leave it to the panel. Gilly, go ahead.
Well, it's kind of a complicated thing. And we were talking in the green room just before we started about my experiences, because I spent several months in Poland and Slovakia. And what I noticed was this kind of a melancholy feel for particularly those over the age of 50, for kind of, it was almost like they missed communism. And it for someone coming from the West, it was very hard to understand what that was. It took me a long time to figure out what it was I was sensing. But it's definitely, there's also this fear of communism at the same time. So it's an interesting perspective, an interesting sort of idea that, you know, there is this sort of hesitation. I don't know. I mean, and I'm coming here. I don't know a lot of the history and stuff. That's why Kuba's here.
I kind of know what you're talking about, because this feeling, and as you told us, most of the people above like 50, they will have it. People of my generation that were born after the fall of Berlin Wall, they don't have this that much. They value more of individual you know. Um, the feeling that the older generation has, I think it might come from welfare state. That obviously, like, it wasn't a welfare state that we know of nowadays, like from let's say Germany, United States, and that sort of thing. But still, in Poland, if you were a worker in a factory, um, like the government, the party could give you, let's say, I don't know, a car or a flat in this block of flats that you saw from the old days, you know. So there definitely there is still some sentiment, although I would say it's nowadays it's dying. Like, as of the older generation is passing, the younger generation, my generation, and even younger, they don't remember this.
Yeah. Would you say, like, from your viewpoint, Cuba, that there's the older population, when the dissolution of the Soviet Union happened, it wasn't an equal break for everyone? I mean, certain people did okay under the Soviet Union. Obviously, a lot of people were oppressed and had a really hard go of it. And in a capitalistic society, they would have a fair and equal opportunity to the same access. But if you're older, you're at the end, coming towards you're getting older in years, and you're thinking about security at that point in your life, maybe you do yearn for that security mindset that, though you kind of idolized your memories a little bit too. And you think, at least, for all the problems maybe the Soviet Union had, at least I knew I had a place, right? Because that was one of the things of communism is, it wasn't a lot of space, but at least you had a place. So, like, I think initially they went like 60 square meters was all the space you got in the Soviet Union, but you had a place. And they basically annexed all the properties from people and said, hey, this mansion, there's 20 rooms in it, and now you can stay in the one room, and that's all you get. And then the other 19 rooms were given out by the government. And maybe that older population looks at that and they see, a security that maybe they don't feel they have anymore. And maybe that's why you have an older population in Russia that is a little more sympathetic to maybe the actions that we're seeing Putin take right now in Ukraine.
And there is also the question of propaganda, because most of the Russia, they don't have access to the internet, as we know. They get the information from television, from their propaganda state, I would say. So all they know is what the government is saying. And I would say this is a cause, one of.
Yeah, and the other concern, I'll get your thoughts, Gilly, but like Ukraine said, President Zelensky had called on Ukrainian hackers to take down Russian government websites shortly after the Russian websites are down. So it's not as though the Russian government has a direct way to put out what their version of events is either. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to have this discussion too, is right now we have the Ukraine's perspective and Russia's perspective, and that's pretty well lit. And then we have Western propaganda bouncing off of what they perceive to be happening on the ground. As people have noted, the Snake Island thing, the go F yourself Russian warship. Yes, the Ukrainian soldiers did say that, but they weren't shot after that. They were captured. There's videos that have proven that. And then the Ghost of Kiev turned out to be a video game. So there's a lot of people that are very hesitant to buy into what they're hearing, and I don't blame them when we have Russian state television. That is basically all you have to go on the Russian side of things. And then you have the Ukrainian side of things, heavily Western-backed. The European investment banks heavily invested in Ukraine as well. And then you find out China's invested in there. And what you have is global superpowers with competing interest in a country that's been invaded. And that's where it leads to this discussion. So I want to go into the next phase here. We'll talk about Crimea. We'll get the perspective from the European perspective from you, Cuba, and then we'll have an open discussion. But 2014, we were talking about this in the green room. The annexation of Crimea, was it an annexation as the international community has described it, or was it a succession? People seem to forget that Crimea left on a vote. But as we were discussing in the green room, I'm always extremely suspicious when 95% of any population votes in favor of something. And so with Crimea, it was over 95% of the population voted in favor of leaving with Russia. And when they ultimately, there were some things that happened around that. We had the Russian warship blocking in Ukrainian ships at the time of the vote. There was Russian troop presence in the area. So was it really a fair and open vote? I feel like, and I'm going to leave this up to the panel, we'll have a discussion, that Russia is smart enough. Again, we have a KGB agent at the head of a country. He's smart enough just to intermingle the truth enough into his narrative that people will buy it. Not only in his own nation, but I think he also knows and understands that the international community needs to be divided on this. Because if there is universal agreement in NATO allied nations about what to do against Ukraine, or against Russia rather, that would be a problem for Russia. So if they can divide those populations through propaganda, that's also beneficial to them. So we'll leave that up. First taker, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the old adage, united we stand, divided we fall. I think there's been a lot of division that has been happening over the last, I don't even know how many years, but it's just been little by little, and it's happening everywhere. We've seen a lot of it in Canada, but it's also happening in Europe. And it's a dangerous game, but it's being used so that other interests can be forced through. Because if you have people that are fighting amongst themselves about things that they should be really, it's issues that should have been put to rest a long time ago. And in my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, we thought we had put those issues to rest, and they've all come back up again. And it's causing these kinds of problems. And then you take up old historic wounds, like starting in World War I, whenever they started dividing up all of the different nations in Europe, and then World War II just exacerbated the problem. And it's just been this stew of history that has bubbled to the surface, and it's creating a lot of problems now.
QB, you want to go in there?
Well, to be honest, we are talking about Crimea and the Donetsk Republic and Luhansk Republic, right?
Correct.
About this one. As far as I know, before the whole conflict began, as you told us, they staged a vote, right? However, from Polish perspective, the information that I have, like I said, everything was staged by Russians. Yeah. And before that, 2014, they're saying that it was like a hybrid war. In Russia they have before it was FSB, I think, KGB, FSB, and then in Russia they have this unit called GRU. It's like how to say? It's like military unit for infiltration of other nations and that sort of thing. So they were like entering to Ukraine like way before, and slowly, like year by year, as far as I know, they were like staging this vote, and in the end, this happened.
If I'm hearing you correctly, and we're going to bring Chris Semchuck's just on the line here. He's going to bring in some perspective on the NATO side of things. Very valuable perspective. We're just bringing him in here shortly. But if I'm hearing you correctly, the Polish perspective was basically like this was provoked by Russia. Russia was, you called it hybrid warfare, but they were provoking things from within. If I'm understanding you correctly.
To be honest, because like I said, eastern part of Ukraine, they have a lot of ethnically Russians, Yes. So the people they
talking Donetsk and Luhansk. Yeah.
Yes. So before 2014, I would say, as far as I know, because I'm not Ukrainian, I don't know a lot about this stuff. However, I from what I read, they were trying to infiltrate this part of Ukraine before and just stage this conflict before.
All right, so we're going to bring in Chris. Chris, we're going to talk about the NATO perspective here, but I'm going to play something real quick for a buffer for you. Actually, it came across this with the Ron Paul report, and I think it's valuable to bring in because Ron Paul pointed out the NATO perspective that Russia may have. And he didn't do it through his own words, which I found fascinating. No, what Ron Paul did is he found out that former presidential candidate, Republican, Taft, was actually sympathetic to an extent about maybe how Russia would have perceived the NATO pact. And so I'm just going to play, it's a quick couple minute video, and then we'll come back in, and I feel like it will be a good place to start again anew the conversation.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Hey, Kuba. Hey, Gilly.
All right, so we're just going to pull this up, play a quick video here for everyone. That is not the one we want. There we go.
2 decades after the end of both the Warsaw Pact and the Cold War, expanding NATO made no sense. NATO itself made no sense. Explaining my no vote on a bill to endorse the expansion, I said at the time, NATO is an organization whose purpose ended with the end of the Warsaw Pact. This current round of NATO expansion is a political reward to governments in Georgia and Ukraine that came to power as a result of U.S.-supported revolutions, the so-called Orange Revolution and the Rose Revolution. Providing U.S. military guarantees to Ukraine and Georgia can only further strain our military. This NATO expansion may well involve the U.S. military in conflicts unrelated to our national interests. Unfortunately, as we have seen this past week, my fears have come true. One does not need to approve of Russia's military actions to analyze its stated motivation. NATO membership for Ukraine was a red line it was not willing to cross. As we find ourselves at risk of a terrible escalation, we should remind ourselves that it didn't have to happen this way. There was no advantage to the United States to expand and threaten to expand NATO to Russia's doorstep. There is no way to argue that we are any way safer for it. NATO itself was a huge mistake. When in 1949 the Senate initially voted on the NATO treaty, Senator Robert Taft, known as Mr. Republican, gave an excellent speech on why he voted against creating NATO. Explaining his no vote, Taft said, quote, "The treaty is a part of a much larger program by which we arm all these nations against Russia. A joint military program has already been made. It thus becomes an offensive and defensive military alliance against Russia. I believe our foreign policy should be aimed primarily at security and peace. And I believe such an alliance is more likely to produce war than peace."
Right. So that's quite the powerful quote. That's why I wanted to bring that in. I felt that was extremely important to get across. So that was Taft at the time, talking about his perspective and basically saying that he didn't, he saw how Russia might see it as an offensive tool of NATO as much as it is defensive, and Paul saying he doesn't see the need for NATO past the Warsaw Pact dissolution. So Chris, you're more familiar with the NATO side of things. What's your perspective on this? Because obviously NATO has expanded quite a bit since it was first started compared to now. Do you feel Russia has a validated viewpoint where they feel like they're being threatened, or is this more delusions of a man who feels threatened as a superpower?
I would say that Russia, from my perspective, having worked with NATO in Afghanistan, and then I was also in NATO AWACS, which is Airborne Warning and Control System out of Germany from July 2011 until August 2014. I would say Putin is justified.
Okay, that is not where I expected you to go with that. So, this is great. This is the kind of conversation you're not going to get in the mainstream media because they just won't have these conversations. So, why do you feel that way, Chris? What specifically kind of makes you lean that way?
Again, and to be clear, justified in the threat of NATO expansion and Western expansion on the Russian borders, okay? Not necessarily let's park the Ukrainian issue for now, okay? Minus Crimea, because before I jumped into this conversation, we were discussing Crimea specifically. Yes. And with NATO and NATO expansion, which Ukraine got brought in as an enhanced partner in 2020. Okay, so an enhanced partner is really the last step before being accepted as a full NATO partner. So that's already been expanding since 2014, correct? So yeah, just as far as Crimea and the expansionism, I feel that, and Putin's been quite clear the whole time that's happened, right? Every time there is more encroachment, more things, he's like, hey guys, stop doing this. So
2007 in Munich, he explicitly addressed kind of concerns around NATO as well. I think the Russian perspective, and Chris, you'll know better based on where NATO's laid out, is that these defensive alliances where these defensive weapons lay could just as easily become offensive, and that as they gain more and more border control, like more and more of these NATO allies along the Russian border, that's where Russia may feel threatened. So I guess the question is the West somewhat to blame for Russia's actions? I mean, obviously these are the actions of somebody who's kind of a madman. He's gone to war and he's gone through the expansionists. He's doing some heinous things, but leadership says you take accountability for what you can take accountability for. So how much does the West kind of factor into Putin's decision? Did NATO provoke this in your mind? Did we do things that perhaps push things in this direction that could have been prevented?
I would say yes. Since 1994 and the independence of the Ukraine, NATO has been trying to push itself in, and I would argue that in a general geopolitical context, the Ukraine since independence in 1994 has been kind of a proxy geopolitical soft war of influence from the east. Yeah, exactly. It's a hybrid, right? And Ukraine's like, here we go. It's only been a country on and off since 1917, 1914. It's just in that buffer zone of the steppe and the plains to be used geopolitically by both sides as an experiment.
Now, part of the concerns I've seen outlaid, I don't know how much truth there is to this, Kuba. You'll know a little bit more of Europe's outlay than maybe I do, but that Soviet-era pipelines, oil pipelines, run through Ukraine. When this stuff kicked off in 2014 with Crimea, they had to reroute a lot of these pipelines to get their oil to market. Now, why this is important is Russia's predominant source of income as a nation is oil. So if they're not having access to the markets with their oil, then that's really problematic. They have no source of income. Now, add into that, we've set a precedent now with this NATO action where we're willing to use FinTrack.
May I stop you? Because
go ahead.
Actually, they are still selling both oil and gas through Ukraine to Poland and then to Germany. So even though they invaded Ukraine right now, it's still pumping. It's still going.
That's interesting. It's interesting that they're able to keep it functional during a war too. It's kind of interesting how necessity gets things done.
I believe it's because of Germany, because Polish people, like Poland, currently we have second term of our government, so it's like almost 8 years, and that our government really, really hates Russians. So their economic plan was to diversify source of energy. Before we were really dependent on Russian gas, and now we are trying to diversify. However, Germans, they're closing coal mines, power plant. They're closing the nuclear power plants, and they were planning, as you know, they were planning to build and use Nord Stream 2. So they were, as far as I know, they were about to increase dependency on Russian gas and then redistribute it to the entire European Union.
That's interesting. And also, just before the invasion kicked off, this is gone by the wayside, kind of missed, but China and Russia met, Putin and Xi, and they made a deal for future energy deal. So I'm just going to pull this up. This is the South China Morning Post, which is the state propaganda for China. It says China, Russia enhance growing energy partnership with gas deal during Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin meeting. This was February 4th, 2022 that this was published. A series of agreements were confirmed, including a deal for Russia to supply China with 10 billion cubic meters, 353 billion cubic feet of gas per year via a new pipeline. So they set that deal up just before kicking off the invasion in Ukraine, which I thought was also interesting. So still, oil is still flowing through Europe, and they also made a deal ahead of time with China. And I'm going to provoke a bigger question here. How does this have to play out in Ukraine in order to not end up in a situation where nations like Canada, the US, another world war situation where these nations get pulled into a bigger conflict? Do we have to, is this as far as we can go without escalating things ourselves, is just supplying weapons, body armor, and finance to the Ukrainians? Because if we put boots on the ground, is that not potentially provoke a situation with not only Russia, but potentially China, who also is a close ally, and the situations it may present there? Obviously, we know China has huge amounts of money invested in U.S. stock, and then it gets even messier because there's things that can happen outside of boots on the ground. So what are our thoughts on this? How far can Western allies go in actually trying to help Ukraine, I guess is the question here.
Well, and one of the other things that we have to realize is that the Western world has become incredibly reliant on China for a lot of different things that we take for granted. For example, our pharmaceuticals and what have you. A lot of that comes out of China. A lot of our supplies for everyday kind of things comes out of China. It's staggering the amount of material that comes out of China. That is our source for so much of our consumer goods. It's crazy. And then add to that, China doesn't just own plots of farmland in the Ukraine. They also own large vasts of resources here in Canada.
China's made it is a national strategy. They can't feed their own people. They don't have the resources they need for their own people. So they're actively going out buying swaths of land in South Africa, Ukraine. They bought 5% of the farmland there. They're buying up land, oil, wherever they can. So yes, I don't think we understand from Western perspective, anyways, how interconnected the tentacles of China and Russia are throughout the global supply chain. I don't think it's as simple as people would like it to be. We're not even in World War II. Like the global supply chains were interconnected then, but it is day and night different now, where I can be sitting here in Canada, but my business can be in India, or my business could be in Russia or in China. And there's people that, as much as they may live in one nation, do business all over the world. And that has become not just an exception, but somewhat of the norm. So it gets, I believe, real messy real quick if we provoke Russia too much. So I don't know where the answer is, but I guess what I'm asking is, do we essentially just let this play out where Ukraine we support them, we back them financially, but can we do any more than that without provoking a situation that will get worse for not just Canada, but the entire globe with these supply chain issues that could quickly become apparent? That we were teased with a little bit during COVID.
Yes, I would argue that if the West keeps doing more and inserting their influence more on the side of this war that's going on, it'll further make things worse. In my humble opinion, it's step back and let the Ukrainians deal with it on their own. Yes, support them logistically, whatever. But if we step forward we as the West or NATO any further, then yeah, there's a lot of risks. And really the only winner of this advancing any forward is, in my humble opinion, going to be China. Because there's Russia in the middle. Look, Putin's a smart man. He did not push this scenario right now. Since 2014, this has been building since the annexation of Crimea in like March 10th-ish, 2014. Putin's ready to be self-sufficient. He knows what's going to happen from the international community on doing this, and he's just, oil's still flowing. They're still making their money. He's selling stuff to China on the east side of things.
almost wonder if Putin's not looking at this as a win-win, where you're right. He can kind of battle and here's another thing that's forgotten, but we have the Federal Reserve and then we have the BRICS Bank, right? We have Brazil, Russia, Iraq, China, and Syria have their own competition to the Federal Reserve, which is vying for global dominance. What dollar or what currency will be the global superpower? I almost wonder if Russia looks at this as a win-win where, they're going to, at the same time that they might get kicked out of the financial system, they can set up their own, and then maybe their oligarchs that have a lot of power within Russia are getting hurt at the same time. And then Putin can come in as long as he can hold out. He might be able to garner more power and control within his own borders as a result of the financial asset seizure that the Western nations and NATO allies have done. And I wanted to bring that up bigger. Cuba, what is kind of the Polish perspective? I know you're taking in a ton of refugees right now. But you're taking it, so you have like 800,000 is understood at the border, and your processing is about one every 60 to 90 seconds, is what we've heard here.
Yeah, like it was 800,000 yesterday. By now, probably 900 or 1 million, probably.
Wow.
There's a lot of things that you mentioned right now.
Sorry. Yes.
And I don't know which to touch actually. I think that we should, as a West, like United States, Canada, European Union, we should keep helping Ukraine with like money, ammunition, arms deals, and that sort of thing. And I would argue from Polish perspective, it's imperative for Ukraine to not to fall, because it is, because
there's concerns in Poland obviously about the knock-on effects of this.
We actually do see it, like if Ukraine falls and Putin will be able to maintain, like get a hold of the terrain, we do see it as a threat. Like we do see it that like the next step will be actually to attack Baltic States and then Poland. You
don't think it stops with Ukraine, and that is a common view here of Western allies.
No, we don't say that that way. Like I was about to say before, I think that Putin see all like Ukraine, Poland, Baltic States, Sweden, Finland as they're part of the world. That this should be like he see it as his part of the world, and NATO, Western countries shouldn't be involved with it. So as we saw before, Ukraine was about to get accepted, let's say like in the process of getting accepted to NATO, and they see Ukraine as part of their territory of influence, and he just couldn't allow. And
I think that's the perfect way you just phrased that. Part of their territory of influence. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be theirs, but like when the pro-Western viewpoints, I think, are extremely threatening to Putin, who, as much as Russia's kind of opened up to capitalism, they've kept distinct characteristics from the Soviet Union as part of the country. Gilly, you had a quote earlier that Putin had. I think that would be a relevant time to bring that into the discussion.
Well, Putin, and I'm not sure when he had said it, but he said, those who don't miss the USSR have no heart, and those who want to bring it back again have no brain.
And so when I hear that there is a little bit of a longing for the old, but at the same time, Putin's acknowledging like it can't be built the same. But it almost sounds like he's sympathetic to that system to an extent.
Well, yeah, and it was exactly what I had experienced whenever, as a Westerner, going into Central Europe and seeing the attitudes of some of the people. It's like there is that heart feeling of that. I guess it's that social security net, that there's a certain way of life, a certain perspective that goes along with that, that's missed But the idea of bringing it back is scary because all of the bad stuff that goes along with it, like spying on your neighbors and having your entire life controlled by the government. So yeah, it's a very unusual juxtaposition for people to live in, to know, the benefits of communism, but know just how bad the costs of it really are on a day-to-day basis.
Because if you're going to implement a communist vision, you have to be willing to go to the furthest extreme to get the coherent, straight across the board universality that's required in a commune. So that's what happens, is you watch the freedoms dissipate because it's all about the state. And I think at the same time, maybe people think they long for the USSR in the days of old, but I think there's something powerful in a nation throwing themselves against the grain, right? Communism was not the current of the time, and saying we're going to be distinctly different and we're going to stand for an entirely different system, and uniting behind everything about that cause and purpose. And that maybe, unfortunately, this will sound callous, but a lot of people don't have purpose in their life. And unfortunately, I think maybe the government that they maybe long for, it had a purpose for them. It may not have been a great purpose, but they had a reason, something bigger than themselves to live for. And I feel maybe that is something lacking today. That's kind of a more philosophical take, but what is the panel's idea here? Is that a little maybe too...
And that idea, actually, just picking up on that, might be part of what is ailing the West at the minute as well, is that and I mean, I hate to go down this road because it's become so controversial, but maybe whenever religion was taken out of everything, it took away people's purpose, their idea of something bigger than themselves, and it wasn't replaced with anything of the same strength. And so people are searching for something, and they wind up in this position of almost trying to bring communism to the West, for example, because you're not allowed to be nationalistic. You're not allowed to, just because society frowns on it now. So all of these things that gave meaning in the past are now frowned on. So now what do you cling to?
Well, the Christian saying, take up your own cross and bear it, has now turned into activism. That's my viewpoint of it. You don't suffer personally in your own life. You virtue signal to the world by going out and being an activist of what you believe in, all your virtues, and how moral and upright you are as a good, upstanding citizen. Look at me, I'm defending these things that I'm supposed to be doing. Whereas the church potentially filled that role before, take up your own cross and bear it and help others. And this was kind of the same journey, but perhaps different guiding values. Let's open this up a little bit more. Chris, NATO Article number 5 will prevent incursions into Baltic states. Glenn brings this up. You talked about Article 5 specifically of NATO with me before off air. Are you familiar enough to bring that up at this time?
Yes.
Okay, so let's
too, I would imagine.
Let's talk about Article number 5 and specifically the incursion into Baltic states. I'll just let you take it away.
Well, it automatically, in theory, if Russia does step through the Polish-Lithuanian Baltic corridor there to come through to the Western Europe, right away NATO's at war with them because it triggers Article 5. So recent example would be after September 11th, Article 5 was declared for NATO to go into Afghanistan, right? So that's how Afghanistan triggered off officially as a NATO ISAF, International Security Assistance Force, to go into Afghanistan. So in theory, that's what would happen. But above that, with this whole conflict, yes, is Putin pushing and projecting that, he's got the power and the strength and the will to push west? Yes, he's fronting that. In my humble opinion, in the Ukrainian context, he's already got the Donbass region. He's already got Crimea. They're pushing through to stabilize and bring troops down into those regions. If the West just slows their roll and Ukraine slows their roll and says, okay, well, I'm talking already ahead of how you could end this. Sorry, Ukraine, are you guys okay with the East being with Russia and Crimea being with Russia? Yes. Okay, war is over. Because really, that is the status of in general, the Ukrainian population and their acceptance of what's going on now, anyway, in my humble opinion of what I've seen, read, and heard from boots on the ground there too, as well. In the Ukraine.
Yeah, Donetsk and Luhansk, just for historical reference here, had a lot of independence like referendums and protests after Crimea happened. So a lot of Russian pro-Russian sentiment in those areas that Putin claimed were breakaway regions before the invasion. Cuba, you wanna add to that?
Yeah, I would actually like to show you a map of current events. Can I
Yep.
share a screen?
Yeah, it's do you know how you're doing it?
We'll see.
You say on the bottom there, we'll say
Okay,
share.
Okay. Okay. So you should see a map, right?
Yeah, I
On
can
the
add it.
south, we have like Crimea. Here you have you can see my mouse, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So here you'd have Donetsk and Luhansk, and here is like northern part. From like north was attacked from Belarus and Russian, obviously. And the south from Crimea. You said that Crimea was basically already occupied. So I would agree on that part. However, they still are not, as far as I know, like the latest information that I have, they still didn't manage to get to connect those two parts, south and east, because we have Mariupol, the city. Current situation is that the city right now is completely devastated and almost taken. I mean, almost, because well, the troops still didn't enter to the city, but the city does not have any electricity, does not have water, not like almost nothing, and the people are fleeing. So 2 days, probably 3 days, and Putin will get hold of this, like southeast, I would say.
So
However,
he'll have a corridor from the eastern Donetsk, Luhansk
yes,
down in the Crimea, which will be very important to him.
yes, that part I would say, yeah, that he will get hold of. However, the north, Kiev, Chernihiv was the first city, major city that they was it Chernihiv or was it? I think it was Chernihiv was the first city that they taken. However, it's the first city, and we are already like in the the 10th day of the war, and they were supposed, as far as I know, they were supposed to finish the whole, like to occupy the whole territory within 15 days. And now I'm following Polish sources and Russian sources as well, because I don't speak Russian. However, I can read Russian because I can read Cyrillic, because I was studying Russian in high school, and I saw some videos on Twitter from, like, basically from Ukrainian side and Russian side, and as a poll, I don't think they will. I don't think they will manage to occupy the whole whole Ukraine. I saw a video, like couple of videos, that most of Russian soldiers, they either don't know that they are already in Ukraine. They most of them, they think that they are still on the doing exercises.
Yeah, I've seen those too.
I saw videos when like with tanks, like Ukrainian guys, they basically, they were driving a car close to a column of Russian column, like with tanks and stuff, and the column wasn't really moving because of lack of gasoline, like they obviously have trouble like with logistics. But the funny thing was that, like, the Ukrainian guy that was talking with Russians, like, he asked them, like, the whole column, like, if they know where they are, what they are doing and stuff, and like most of Russian soldiers, they don't know what they are doing, and once they hear they are in Ukraine, that they are going to Kiev, like they were about to invade Kiev, like most of them they give up. They don't they just give up. They desert.
Yeah, it's almost a volume game. You get the impression from the Russian military. I've seen those videos too. It seems like Russian soldiers not knowing why they're there. Some thinking they're on like doing exercises, and then it makes you wonder. And then the supply logistics issues. Chris, you'll know more about this. How much planning goes into, warfare. It strikes me as odd that an intelligence agent would have supply issues in an invasion he's planned. But maybe that's just me. What's your take on that? Was this maybe a hastily put together thing? It doesn't seem like it was. I mean, there was the buildup of troops on the border, so I'm not sure how the supply chain issues are factoring in when it seems like it was premeditated a little bit.
Well, exactly. And, if it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, based on what you're saying of logistics issues, based on what Kuba was saying, is, there's been documents that have been seized and put out there that, the whole campaign was lightning war and we'll take the country in 15 days. Yet 10 days into it, they've only, stabilized and occupied one city. Information warfare, cyber warfare, psychological operations, etc. So, we got to remember, warfare is not just kinetic operations, kill, kill, kill. Total spectrum of warfare now is cyber, influence operations, psychological operations, etc. So, why go kinetic? Why send in all the 150 to 200,000 troops that are amassed on the border to take things when, maybe Putin's aims will be achieved without having to do that?
Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I mean, I remember hearing reports for years about troops going into the Ukraine from NATO. So I would imagine that Putin has been aware. Well, I mean, obviously he's been aware of it and concerned about it for some time. And I use the analogy, well, if Russia had put nuclear subs off the coast of North America, we'd do something about it. We wouldn't be happy about it. We wouldn't be feeling calm and, like, okay, that's fine. That's not what our attitude would be. So you would think, because these announcements have been made for so many years in the West about bringing in troops and stuff, that Putin's been preparing for this. What exactly initiated it? That's kind of the question. And I think it's the thing that's kind of making everybody wonder, like, what happened now? Why not 2 years ago or 2 years from now? Why right now is this happening?
Kuba, you want to go? And then I think what we'll do is we'll kind of close out with final thoughts for each person and the panel.
Okay, no problem. I can give you a thought. Okay. I think why now? I believe it was the weakness of the West, I would say, in terms of
I agree.
Yeah, in various ways, but most of I would say energy sources, because like I said, Germany was basic up till now. They were really, really, really getting dependent on Russian or like energy sources, and they were about to get even more dependent on their sources. And I think they kind of, like, Russia kind of overestimated that dependency, because I think that they were thinking that Germany will not act the way they act now, that the whole West will not act so strong. I would say that the response would not be that strong, and they overestimated, I think.
You think that Russia thought it would be more of a deterrent to Western allies to step in and sanction based on their oil and how much they supply.
Yeah, exactly. Because for Putin, for Russia, like this trade, like oil trade, gas trade, everything else, like resources, is just another weapon, you know. But I think, like, I believe Western countries like France, Germany, other countries, Italy, they finally like got Polish perspective. Like they finally got this, got that, like they understood that there is no logic, I would say, in what Russia does, like Putin does, and you cannot really rely on that kind of partner. So that's why they I believe they will now, they will stop uh buying, like resources and stuff.
Do you think this will be the straw that broke the camel's back and
Ah,
cause
I
the
think
chain of breaking away from the
Well,
Russian economy a little bit?
firstly, as a poll, I hope it will happen like this. But it is actually what I see right now, from even like from the governments of Western countries. They finally, they are doing what Polish government, for like Polish people were saying that we should do as a Western countries. They finally kind of get our point. And yeah, I think that's it. I really think that now it should change. And also the companies, like all the multinationals, they all kind of, they divert, they go, like they leave Russia.
All right, so let's go with closing thoughts here. Just anything that you think has been missed or that needs to get across, and just kind of your overall feeling of the Ukraine-Russia situation as succinct as you can in a couple of minutes. We'll start with you, Chris.
Well, first of all, thoughts and prayers to the Ukrainian people, and hopefully we continue to support them in whatever ways we can without this advancing any further. Again, just I was brought in here to talk about NATO too and everything. So just real quick, I want to remind people when other countries join NATO. So just first of all, NATO AWACS specifically. So that plane there, that's a high-end surveillance platform, okay, was actively engaged in Crimea through bordering in Romania and Poland right away, starting March 10th. 2014, NATO started doing enhanced missions with NATO AWACS there, okay? And in that component, we've got the Czech Republics involved in that, Hungary, Poland, Romania, okay, as former Eastern Bloc countries, okay? NATO period now has 30 countries that are members, all right? The original 12 founding nations, okay, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, next Luxembourg, the Netherlands, etc. Okay, but let's talk about expansionism here. So we've got the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined in 1999. Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia in 2014 joined NATO. Albania and Croatia in 2009, Montenegro in 2017, and it's up on the screen there. So again, this discussion's been around a little bit about the war and who's just, and some history around the war, and no war is just. And we have to ask ourselves why this triggered off right now, and no crisis goes to waste, and a crisis has been starting to wind down for the past 2 years. So big shiny squirrel over here, look at the war, watch this, nothing going on over here. And I would suggest that in the Canadian context and the legislative agenda that's going on in the House of Commons right now would definitely suggest that. Look, watch this, we're supporting Ukraine. Woo! But sleight of hand, we're doing this, and Canada is going down a very bad path. So put Canada first, support your Ukrainian friends, families, associates in whatever way you can, and try to look past the noise of a crisis that's going on.
All right, Gilly, closing thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things that's sort of been skirted around is the energy situation. We've gone so far into the environmental side of things that we've forgotten that we are still reliant on natural gas and oil. To me, one of the big things that should be in from the Canadian perspective, we have got so much oil and gas here. There is no reason why we aren't exploiting that. We should be exploiting that. We should be energy self-sufficient in Canada and North America. That should be a primary goal. And then we could, in these situations where there is a crisis, we could be giving that to the world. And if we would just exploit our natural resources, a lot of the problems that we've had over the 2 years of COVID would be solved almost instantaneously. And the issues with separation within Canada and all of those issues would also be assuaged through using our natural resources, becoming more nationalistic and having that nationalistic pride. What's really disgusting is we just got out of this thing with the convoy where waving a Canadian flag was somehow putting a mark on your back, like you were some kind of a bad person. But now we have politicians that have the Ukrainian flag on their Twitter feeds and wearing the little lapel pins and stuff. Like, you got to pick a lane. And it seems like in the West, we're not allowed to be proud of our history and everything that we have to offer to the world. But we can look at someplace else and go, hey, they're allowed to be nationalistic. We stand with them. Well, how can we stand with them whenever we're not standing for ourselves? And that, to me, I think that's a lot of where the divisiveness, the struggles, the pain is coming from for a lot of people, because it's hard to square these circles. And it's time that we started thinking about, as Chris said, Canada first. Let's start getting our head in the game so that we are coming from a place of strength, so that we can help in a really strategic way to places that actually need it.
Yeah, we would definitely be in a much better position financially and to help on a global scale, and especially in a conflict like this, if we were self-sufficient in that way. And there's no reason Canada should not be self-sufficient with our reserves at what they're at. Kuba, closing thoughts.
Like
No
I
pressure.
said, so, I'm standing for my friends from Ukraine. I hope they will win that war. I was actually helping on the border last weekend. Actually, what I really hope that this will end really, really quickly, and we will be able to somehow pass on. Like, I hope it will finish soon, and everything will end up like good. That Russia will not dominate them, and that's it. I hope everything will turn out good.
Yeah. All right. So now the pressure of wrapping up the show. Thank you, Chris, Gilly, Kuba. It's very valuable to have diverse perspective on a topic as diverse as this and as complicated as this. It takes a lot of minds honing in on the same information to find the gaps. Closing out, obviously, prayers with Ukraine. I hope that they can battle off the Russian people. Personally, I look at this, the Russian army, not the Russian people. Sorry for that mix-up. But my concern over this is that this leads to something bigger, that this, like World War I and World War II, with the supply chains being as interconnected as they are now, can lead to things that are unforeseen in the current circumstances. I would hate to see us push Russia into a corner where they don't feel like they can be a part of the global markets after this has kind of resolved, and that pushes them with their back against the corner, causing them to do something even more stupid. I have those concerns. I have concerns about China and Russia working together and making a global move for global power against the United States. Kuba, you talked about Western leadership being weak and why now. And I want to offer this to the panel here and get, I guess, some thoughts, and we'll just close out on that. But I think the reason why now is after 2 years of COVID, of the West stepping all over their people's rights and people not being as trustworthy of their governments here and what they say and what the media has to say on things. It was an opportunity for Putin to be able to push through propaganda that otherwise wouldn't have hit home. And the timing was right in that regard. I would also suggest that Western allies, NATO nations, have spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars on COVID. And at this time, they've caused inflation to start rising up in their own nations. And this maybe caps their ability to get involved in a conflict as well without causing further knock-on effects. So I think timing is everything. Perhaps that's why we are seeing some of the supply logistical issues that we are from Putin. I'm not sure why that's happened the way it is, but that is my concern as a Western ally. Obviously, we want to do everything we can to help Ukraine, but we don't want to do anything that's going to provoke this into a bigger situation that adds more countries. And I think we're talking about, Western allies expanding through NATO, and that pact could be seen as an aggressive action by Russia. And in the same way, maybe, Western allies and NATO nations don't push their ideas through with force, but we definitely use our influence around the world and all the tools available to us through our interconnected globe to definitely push our ideas. And these things could have been seen as threatening from Russia, leading to the unfortunate circumstances. At the end of the day, I think we're seeing a hybrid war as talked about, where it's not only boots on the ground, but it is propaganda. It is pushing just enough truth in the narrative that not only the Russian people buy the propaganda, but the international community remains divided so as not to have a succinct and concrete allied force that's all on board with their people on board and supportive of any action they might take. That being said, thank you for joining us today. I'm Greg Staley of Diverge Media. We have Gilly Davis to my right, Chris Semchuck below me, and Kuba. I'm not going to even try to pronounce your name. I apologize for the last name, but thank you so much for bringing the perspective of Europe and Poland. I hope things settle down in your country. I hope that you're able to help these refugees and make them feel comfortable. And I hope that the international community is stepping up, not only to help Ukraine, but to help a nation as lovely as Poland, who is stepping up and taking. That is a big deal. I don't think people understand how big of a deal it is. We can talk about Ukraine and the fight there, but 900,000 people in the course of a week or so, and a little bit, is unreal. Processing people every 60, 90 seconds. So thank you to Poland and everything your country is doing right now for the people of Ukraine as well. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.